What's up guys, today I'm proud to be reviewing my most anticipated title of 2017, and just listen to that music. Such a great way to set the tone for a game about conquering some of the greatest nations in history and exploring all that it can provide. So does this game live up to the expectations set upon it from such a great title screen? Well, it's time to find out, because this is Eiyuu Senki, The World's Conquest by Tenko, and let's get started. Our story starts with a rather ominous voice speaking about war being started, and chaos growing, and other dark things on the horizon, before pulling a 180 and introducing us to the heroine Himiko. She is strategizing on how she plans to take over the world, starting with the unification of Zaipang. Now that's all well and good, but Himiko may be one of the most ineffective generals I have ever seen in a video game, and she proves this by getting caught within the first 10 minutes of the story. Facing her defeat from Oda Nobunaga. Yeah, you heard me, Nobunaga. Because if you're doing an eroge with historical connections, gender bent is truly the best way to go about it. Anyways, Himiko's army is unceremoniously spanked and sent home, and almost fails to make it because of bandit attacks. Real talk, Himiko's perseverance in this game is really admirable, because nothing this girl does ever works out. Luckily, the game finally decides to throw her a bone by bringing the player into the picture, and the main character arrives in a bolt of lightning to save her. Then you collapse. And with that, the game officially starts. Kinda. Cue the intro cinematic. I don't know about this one. Honestly, this intro kinda disappointed me. It's cute and anime and everything, which is reflected in the game, as this is a much more lighthearted title than any game that's about taking over the world should be. But honestly, the in-game music and the intro that we started from is really good and fits the game much more than this does. Finishing the intro movie lands the player in even more introductory cutscenes. Your character is introduced properly as someone from the real world with memory loss, so you get to name him, though at the time of this review that was bugged, so don't expect to be able to use your full name. The game introduces us to some Zaipang native characters and properly introduces the concept of heroes, aka gender-bent versions of historical figures. The story progresses for way too long, then finally the player is given the freedom to choose their first faction to fight, which also sets the difficulty of the game. The three factions, Mongolia, the Taika Empire, and India, are excellent in setting the kind of expectations from the game. Each of the three factions have very different feels from each other, both in their unit types and their heroes, with Mongolia having archers and being ruled by Kublai Khan, who seduced Marco Polo, random, though sadly it's not Genghis, although she is referenced by the character. The Taika Empire has Sun Tzu working with Lu Bu.
Listen carefully. Do not pursue Lu Bu
in order to protect Qin Shi Huang. And finally, India has nudist and pacifist extraordinaire Ashoka. The character designs in Eiyuu Senki as a whole are pretty good. A few characters feel kinda generic and everyone seems to be allergic to pants, but most of the characters rock their nationalities and their source materials pretty well, with some really interesting Easter eggs mixed in, such as Gilgamesh's design. Okay, to explain this one, her visual design primarily takes from a gender-bent version of Fate Stay Night's Gilgamesh. But not only that, her multiple robotic arms that are seemingly out of place are actually a reference to Final Fantasy's Gilgamesh. These types of things are really cool to notice, and I wish I was more historically literate in order to see them. The whole world is your oyster in this game, with civilizations such as the European Union, Macadamia, Babylonia, Australia, Britannia, North America, a lot of us, and so much more. But anyways, after being the first set of factions, the game introduces its primary villain, and this is a doozy. This was hands down the funniest reveal I've ever seen in a video game.
これこそがイルミナティよ、イルミナティ。
The Illuminati. It was right about at this reveal that I accepted all the crazy things going on in this game. The bloodless wars with captains acting like senpai noticed them when their armies are crushed by rocks. The historical hiccups whenever two factions that actually did interact in real life happen to do in the game. At this point, I accepted it all and never looked back. With all this hilarity and zaniness, there is one particular thing that kind of feels left out. Yeah, he kinda suffers from VN protagonist syndrome, where he feels more like an avatar for the player, resulting in him blandly just reacting to the story rather than directing it. Hell, his accomplishments feel rather unjustified most of the time. He's called a great strategist, even though most of the game is really straightforward and he's constantly taking lessons from other people. He's called a really powerful fighter despite kinda having average stats in game. And most annoyingly, he is constantly being called a playboy or Casanova, but I went half the game without fucking more than one person.
Not for lack of trying, mind you!
He's not the worst MC ever, and he does get some character development near the end, but he really falls short compared to the supporting cast. After saying all this, one thing must be acknowledged before going into this game. This is a very text-heavy title with cutscene events outnumbering gameplay events seemingly 100 to 1. Attempting to exhaust an area of events before fighting can take quite a while, which may be a plus if you like a lengthy story, but a minus if you're here primarily for the gameplay. Or the porn, but we'll talk about that later. Finally, I just want to point out that the visuals in general for this game are nice with HD resolution, 60 FPS gameplay, though it sometimes struggles to maintain the frame rate, which is really weird for a 2D game, and a beautifully designed UI for all the menus. It's just visually amazing. And it even comes with a very in-depth settings menu so you can tweak anything that feels out of place. All in all, from a story and visual perspective, I was really digging this title, and I will quickly and without spoilers say the final act, a masterpiece. But this game is not all just story and looks. Though that composes most of it, it's time to talk about gameplay. Eiyuu Senki's gameplay is divided to say the least. On the one hand, the world map interactions are kinda garbage, but on the other hand, the combat is simply yes! So let's dive into that. The game's world map is big, but don't be fooled. While factions have anywhere between 3 to 7 different territories, they don't have much going on with them. Advancing through territories is fairly straightforward, with the game rarely throwing any curveballs to force me to even pause in my advance. Some locations do have walls, which means that you need to attack them multiple times in order to take them down, and one faction did have a side mission to shortcut around their heavily guarded area straight to the enemy's base, but those kind of events are very rare. The game has tons of small side story missions to gather money or items, but not that many that actually affect the world map. Speaking of affecting the world map, I didn't notice this at first, but the game is designed in a way that despite having tons of factions, you end up fighting them in a fairly linear set of groups. Defeating one group unlocks the path to another, with no roundabout ways to attack an enemy from multiple angles. Russia is one exception to that, with the ability to fight them from 2 different starting points depending on the faction you defeated previously, and a debuff attached to their land that can only be removed with a special event coming from a completely different faction. But it is not impossible to beat them without it, just very hard. In fact, before the great hard drive corruption of fuck you Windows 10, I tried to fight Russia without the event. It didn't go well, but that also made me discover something. this game doesn't want me to lose. When you are defeated, you are not kicked out of the area with your tail between your thoroughly spanked ass cheeks. You are told to retry, reload, or undo the act of attacking them in the first place. Oh damn, Needle Rush, that's overkill. Oh, I can't retreat from this battle? Fuck. No, game, this is war. Who the fuck goes undefeated in war? Now you can lose defensive fights and simply eat that defeat, but on the offense, it feels like the game is save scumming for you. At the end of a turn, you gain money from all the lands that you own, but man, I wish there were more things to do with it, as by the end of the game, I was fat. You had events and unit buying, but that was clearly not enough to balance the income after a point. Didn't help that the game has no time limits for events, so I was able to simply spam turns until I could max out the troop count of a certain someone for obvious reasons. Speaking of overwhelming numbers, this game has a ton of characters to obtain, and you don't have any sort of in-game unit cap to get in your way. Something I really liked about the character roster was the inclusion of several bonus units that I have to believe were not created by the initial development team, as they have no HCG and are done in a completely different art style from the rest of the game. Not to mention the inclusion of an old friend from a very well beloved franchise. Now, we've gone through the hit or miss world map of this game, but if that was all there was, then this review would be a lot more somber and a hell of a lot more depressing. So let's go to the good shit, the combat. The combat of Eiyuu Senki is a series of simple mechanics that when put together become a really fun experience. Characters do not have a dedicated class attached to them, but instead have a primary weapon type with a set of skills related to said weapon type. Things like swords, axes, rocks, guns, cannons, magic, and other random things. There is even a boomerang weapon type. When's the last time you saw a boomerang weapon type? Now, despite having a primary weapon type, characters are not limited to those sets of skills. Some characters have skills from other weapon types if it fits their design, personality, or playstyle. The combat is done on a grid-based combat system, much like other tactics games, with a troop limit of 5 and later in the game terrain bonuses to certain squares. The grid is simplified into a 3x6 field where units can move around or attack with skills that all have specific target zones, such as the sword being a well-rounded weapon that can hit 2 columns away or any row regardless of the player's position, versus something like the fist, which can only attack 1 column in front and only 1 row near the attacking unit, requiring proper positioning in order to get off attacks. Or you could even use something like the boomerang, which can attack in a specific pattern around the target location. I mean, some of these attack patterns can get really weird, ranging from targeting a specific square all the way to skills that draw shapes with their targeting pattern. The game's more traditional mechanics also have a small spin on them, such as critical hits not dealing more damage, instead ignoring armor, making gun units or the one real katana user really good at dealing with those high defense targets, as they have crit based skills. Support units feel more useful in this title, as there's more to do than just buff stats or heal, with units delaying enemy turns, building meter, erecting damage reduction barriers, or even shifting around the turn order. Healing in particular feels more useful here because even low health targets can deal decent damage, so healing a mid health target so it can barely survive the next blow does have some merit. On top of all that, the game has an attribute system, so some weapon types deal or take bonus damage from other weapons, but if you depend only on type advantage, you will notice the meter you normally build dealing damage goes to the opponent instead, so the player has to weigh the options when selecting units. This leads us to talk about the meter gauge. Every turn, both sides build a small amount of meter. This meter can be used to unleash special attacks by units, and near the end of the game can be used to unleash really powerful ultimate attacks. You can also build meter by either attacking enemies you don't have type advantage to, or by using skills that boost the meter gauge. Outside of the lackluster world map interactions and the superb combat gameplay, the last thing you need to look at is the unit progression. As you complete events for various characters, you will unlock new things like moves, passive abilities, and extra item slots. You sadly don't get the ability to manually change the stats of units or switch out the skills for new ones, but the skills provided do a good job ensuring that you use a variety of characters in different battle setups. The way you actually change character stats is through the use of items, which range from boring stat boost of varying strength, unique passive effects such as damage reduction, or even changing the amount of aggro a unit generates, so you can make beefy tanks or squishy assassins. The only problem with all these game mechanics is the fact that the game is really easy when you get down to it, so keeping all these factors relevant does require the player to kinda restrain themselves from any desire to take any of the available shortcuts in order to get the best experience. These pros and cons to the gameplay really do even out in my mind to make the gameplay itself an enjoyable experience, but not a fully fleshed out one. Many of the mechanics outside of the combat feel like they were added in without reaching their full potential. Some more varied character progression and ways to deal with the enemy factions would have been nice, and an overall more difficult experience would have been really preferred, but what I got was decent. But something I hope that isn't just decent is the CGs, so let's move on to our miscellaneous section, Eroge. Here we are, the icing on the cake, the cherry on top, the Blu-ray of a fan service anime. We are talking about the Eroge. So, how is it? Well, it's good, but I do have some complaints. First of all, when it comes to the general fanserviciness of the title, yeah, I'm using that word, I did go over some of that in the story/presentation section of the video, like the fact that no one wears pants in this damn game, but outside of the outfits themselves, the game does not do much else for simple fanservice. There are moments in the dialogue that plays out like a classic harem anime, such as the traditional fall forward and attach hand A to breast B, but there are not that many CGs for such events, especially in the early game where CGs in general outside of faction reveals are scarce. Later into the game, there is an inclusion of some purely fanservice CGs, with my favorite being Da Vinci seen from behind wearing her Hadaka craftsman apron. So simple, yet so beautiful. Moving on, of the 105 CGs, and that sadly does count alternates, so it's not truly 105, roughly a fifth of those are non-HCGs, so if you're just here for the sex, the game does have you covered, but if you like the story a lot, you'll get the feeling of wishing there were some more touching scenes or action scenes to get some CGs. Moving on to more adult topics, the sex CGs are well done, with the artist catering to a wide variety of fetish material, ranging from the traditional missionary to the multiple partners to BDSM play, and even sneaking in a tentacle scene where there is literally no place for it in this game. I do want to bring attention to the BDSM scenes though, as referencing what I said early on in this video, Eiyuu Senki is a really vanilla game. They painted warfare with rainbows in ways I could not believe, and as one would expect, they did the same with their H scenes. But if you just happen to see one or two of these on the internet without context, you would get a completely different picture of what goes on in this game. The writing of these scenes is rather long, and I'm not going to try to critique them quality wise, just pointing out that these are the types of scenes meant to engross the reader, not wham bam thank you ma'am back to the gameplay. I enjoyed many of the scenes in the game, despite losing interest in some of them if they didn't include a character that I already liked. But on that note, something I noticed was that this game has a real bias for the small characters over the mature ones. Now, I'm not saying this game is covered in Shadman bait, but man, this game kinda pissed me off with its selection, as there are a decent number of characters who got no CG in the game at all, while characters like Benki get 3. Honestly, I feel like my ranting about certain characters getting multiple CGs while others don't show how much I like the artwork in the first place, as otherwise I probably would have overlooked it. With that said, I don't believe the really anime style will be for everyone, as that was the message I got from my chat after streaming the beginning of the game. If you're watching this video and you're not immediately put off by the art style, then I think you'll like the CGs as well, but one thing I must note before moving on to my final thoughts, Ashoka got fucking robbed. Eiyuu Senki was an interesting game to play. I had tons of expectations for it despite never actually seeing any of the game until now, and after beating the game and experiencing all it had to offer, I would have to say that the title fell behind in my expectations in many ways, but still ended up an enjoyable experience that I will fondly remember. The bloodless warfare was probably the hardest pill for me to swallow when I compare this to other games I had played in the past, but eventually I did swallow that pill and my enjoyment skyrocketed as a result. The gameplay of this title only breaks even because while it has an excellent combat system, it's held back by the ease of the game and the world map interactions that surround it, which have some good ideas but fail to expand on them. With that said, I will really give credit for the ending, as the final stretch were the best moments in the game, both in story and in gameplay. They actually challenged me at the very end. Going to the arrow content, despite my ranting in that particular section, it only serves to show how much I liked the characters and their designs and their sexuality and how much I just wanted to see more of it. I really felt that a lot of time and effort went into this game, and as a result of that, it was a really fun experience. And factoring all that in, plus the price of $39.99, I will have to say that the final rating for Eiyuu Senki, The World's Conquest, is a solid buy. I wish I could give it a steal rating, but without some form of replayability and half of its gameplay failing to meet the expectations of the other half, it just didn't earn that kind of rating. Hell, I'd have to reduce that score to a sale for anyone who is really focusing on having a challenging take over the world experience. But the way I see it, this game is perfect for those who want to have a kind of fun and fan servicey anime story filled with cute characters and having fun battles to break up the story portions. And with that, we have reached the end of the review. I hope this helps you decide whether or not you want to buy Eiyuu Senki. Leave in the comment section your opinions of the title, and I'll see you guys in 2018 with our next review as requested by my last patron poll, Fate Extra. Later.